46. Great. Hey, everyone. My name is Chris House. I am a second grade teacher in Columbia, South Carolina, also a Midlands area rep for SC for Ed. And we are here to talk to our candidates for Senate District 46 in the upcoming election this year, just to find out more about where they stand on some different educational issues. So we're going to begin with you, Nathan. If you'll just introduce yourself, talk a little bit about why you're running for office and a little bit about your platform.
Okay, so first I'd like to thank SC for Ed for holding these forums. I'm glad that you're holding the candidates and our incumbents accountable. It's very important in this time. My name is Nathan Campbell. I am a candidate for Senate District 46 in Beaufort, Bluffton, Hilton Head, and Jasper counties. Currently, I am a social studies teacher at May River High School in Bluffton. I've taught in South Carolina for 12 years in public and in higher education. Currently, I am a social study. Before moving to South Carolina, I grew up in a small town in West Virginia. My parents were public school teachers, and this is where I was first able to identify some of these issues with public education. Upon graduating high school, I attended Marshall University, and I interned and later worked in the West Virginia State Senate for over 5 years. I worked for actually both political parties in the majority and minority leaders' offices. I worked for the president of the Senate. I worked for 2 former governors and current U.S. Senator Joe Manchin. In South Carolina, I was fortunate enough to be an assistant basketball coach and help our teams reach 4 state championships in my first 6 years of coaching. In my last 6 years, though, in the profession, I've been dedicated to more building courses and programs in the public schools, like a student-run television program, Model United Nations, mock trial teams, Academic World Quest, and Youth in Government. I actually serve on the state board for the Youth in Government organization, and last year was awarded the best advisor in the state. So over the past 15 years, I've traveled the country to find the best practices in education in the different types of schools, from charter to magnet to STEM to STEAM, and to take these ideas to provide them for our students to get the best product for them. I've been able to bring ideas from schools, designing curriculum, and developing these courses over time. I am very proud of these programs I've been able to build around the aspect of giving students the opportunity to excel in. I feel I'm the right person to take us in the right direction for education because of my past work experience and my current work experience. And we've seen in the past week how our leadership at the state level really feels about our profession.
Thank you. Senator Davis?
Sure. My name's Tom Davis. I'm the state senator for District 46, which includes portions of Beaufort and Jasper counties. I was first elected in 2008 and then subsequently reelected in 2012 and 2016. And prior to that, I was involved in government service. I moved into the basement of Mark Sanford in 2002. He asked me to help him run his gubernatorial campaign. So I did, and I ran it with his wife, Jenny. Mark ended up winning that race. And then when he went to Columbia, I couldn't go back to practicing real estate law. The bug had bit me. So I went up and I became his chief policy advisor, his legislative liaison. And in the last 2 years I worked for Mark, I was his chief of staff. And then I decided to run for state senate myself. I've lived in Beaufort since 1985, married, 3 daughters. All 3 daughters attend public schools here in Beaufort County. I look forward to sharing my thoughts about public education with you this evening.
Okay. So we'll stay with you for the first question. And sure. So for people watching this, because some people may not see this video till late October, we're filming this in July. So education's feeling and looking a little different right now because we have special circumstances. And you can address those if you want, but this is meant to be really more of a general question. When you look at the state of public education in South Carolina, what are some things that maybe catch your attention? What are your thoughts on public education right now?
Yeah, and we've been dialed into this now for a little over a year, ever since the education reform bills, the current version, started moving in the House and the Senate. And I really started digging into this seriously this time around last fall. I met with several teachers in my district. I then went to Columbia and met on several occasions with Kathy Manis, the Pamela State Teachers Association, to develop, some ideas about how to reform K-12 public education in South Carolina. Also worked with my good friend Mike Fanning, who has a lot of experience in this area and was guided in a lot of respects by Mike. And so I boil it down to 9 reforms, 4 of which involve money, 5 of which do not involve money. And interestingly, when I attended the rally, the SE for Ed rally in Columbia last year, when I walked around and talked to teachers, most of them did not complain about money to me. It was not about the money. Now, money is important, but that wasn't the primary thing. And so I want to talk about what the things we can do to improve public education are, starting first with those that are monetary related. First of all, we have to get our teachers' pay not only to the Southeastern average, but above the national average. We're about $50,000 a year now. The national average is about $60,000. We had a good step in that direction last year with a 4% across the board increase in teacher pay, and then entry salaries up to $35,000. And going into this year, before COVID-19 hit, it looked really good that we could have another 5% increase across the board on top of that. Now, that is going to cost, as you probably know, about $245 million recurring dollars. And so it's going to take till September when we go back to put together the Appropriations Act and we have the Board of Economic Advisors estimates to find out what sort of recurring revenues that we have. But I can tell you, to the extent that we have new recurring revenues, the top priority to me is to keep that promise in regard to continuing to raise those teacher salaries. Second of all, there are certain incentives that we can afford right now to re-implement. First of all, the national board certifications. To me, it was penny wise and pound foolish a year ago when we stopped funding those. We need to keep teachers in the classroom, provide them with that $5,000 incentive, and don't leave them only going to administration to increase their salaries. I mean, the frustrating thing is, teachers get frustrated with the lack of pay increases. They see the way to make money is to go into administration, and we lose these first-rate teachers into administrative positions. So I think one thing we can do to remedy that is to restore those national board certifications. Also in regard to the life scholarship stipends that we issue, they shouldn't be reserved only for those who have majoring in math or science. They should also be the stipend given to those who want to pursue a career in public education as well. Class size, that's obviously something we need to address, and the way we can address it in the short term is not by renewing the proviso, which suspends the current class size requirements we have in the code. That'll be a good start. Okay, in recent years, we've been simply saying, never mind what's in the South Carolina code, we're going to pass this proviso, and you districts, you can do whatever you want. We can start in September by not passing that proviso and letting those statutory requirements stand. Non-financial things that we can do right away. I talked a lot about them on the Senate floor this year, the Teachers' Bill of Rights with Mike Fanning, this whole idea of empowering teachers in the classrooms. What I keep hearing over and over again from teachers is they don't feel like parents have their backs, they don't feel like administrators have their backs, and if there's a conflict in the classroom, nobody really stands up for them. The notion of the Bill of Rights is important because the teacher in the classroom, and I said this many times in the Senate floor, is sovereign in that classroom. It goes unquestioned. And that's the way it was when I was raised in public schools. You didn't dare cross a teacher and you gave utmost respect. We've eroded that respect over time. And this notion of establishing some fundamental basic rights that teachers have in the classroom is something that Mike Fanning and I discussed this last session. And we got adopted into the Senate bill, not in the way that I wanted it to, but at least we have a version of it adopted. We can also do a lot to decrease testing. As you know, the federal Every Student Succeeds Act has certain baseline testing requirements, but then it goes on to encourage districts and superintendents and school districts and superintendents of education to seek waivers from those federal requirements and to articulate other ways of measuring success. Here in South Carolina, we already have more tests than the baseline established by that federal act, and we don't go about seeking waivers. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and pursue those waivers, decrease the testing, move away really from the standardized testing even and the end of course testing, and move toward these authentic assessments. Trust the teacher in the classroom, take these testing burdens off them. Unencumbered time, that was something that we talked about a lot. Of the 190 days contract time, 180 days have to be for instructional days. The other 10 should be unencumbered for the teacher. Unfortunately, the state has sort of pressed down on districts saying that this should be used for, quote, professional development. And they take up those 10 days with more and more mandates and more requirements. Teachers are professionals. They know how to improve themselves. They don't need to have the districts telling them how to spend those 10 days. Those 10 days ought to be unencumbered. That won't cost us anything in the general fund and will do a lot to improve quality of life for teachers. restructuring the EOC. I would go one better and just do away with the EOC. I'm not sure why we have to have it. We have a state board of education. We have a superintendent of education. We have superintendents in each school district. We have elected school board members. We have all sorts of accountability in those respects. Why do we have to have an EOC board, which is primarily made up of business people and politicians, overseeing what educators do? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We ought to abolish the EOC. And then lastly, in regard to school start dates, this is tricky because of particularly the Grand Strand and the powerful position that those legislators hold. They want to have it pushed back as far as possible, not starting until the third Monday in August, because they want that cheap labor for the summer. But I recognize the predicament that puts school districts in. I mean, you guys want to finish up your first semester before the winter break. You don't want to get to a situation where students are having to take end of course tests after taking a 2-week winter break. That doesn't make any sense. You don't have teachers having to turn around on a dime and close out one semester and get ready for a second semester in 24 to 48 hours. They ought to have that winter break to prepare. And then lastly, we have this practice now at the district level of districts shortening the first semester and jamming a bunch of curriculum into that and lengthening the second semester to try to get around the school start date requirements and still squeeze in the 188 instructional days. That makes no sense. So I'm fully supportive of letting that start earlier so that we don't have those problems. So those are the 9 reforms that I would implement. I would back each and every one of those financial reforms, and I would back each and every one of those non-financial reforms.
Thank you. Mr. Campbell, same question. When you look at the current state of public education, what are some thoughts that you have?
Well, as of a few days ago, public education is visibly under attack. Just in the past week, our governors decided to double down on a political party stance and forgot that most citizens in our state want leaders that support public education. Instead, he's reading straight out of the handbook of Betsy DeVos and is parroting the federal position on school reopenings during the state's peak in COVID cases. And just a few days ago, to give $32 million out of $48 million of CARES Act funding to private schools to pay for tuition, this money is needed, especially in Title I schools. I've taught in Title I schools, and I know what kind of funding disadvantages they've been put in because of Act 388. And to expand broadband, to get one-to-one opportunities for students and for critical PPE, some of these districts were hoping to get that money so they could help do these things for their schools. Funneling money to private schools has been a stance of most of our state legislators for recent years. Since Senator Davis was first elected in 2008, he sponsored bills and amendments to expand the funding that goes to private schools, charter schools, but has not fully funded our public schools in his tenure. Because of this stance, he's endorsed by the Public Charter School Alliance of South Carolina, and he even proposed this year sticking an amendment into our reform bill to funnel money away to private schools. And Senator Hembry, who's the powerful person he talks about from Horry County, even called this a miscalculation and partisan to where it could possibly fail the bill. Senator Davis feels so intensely about this. I found 3 different articles done in a matter of 10 days trying to explain his support for sending money away from our public education system. My opinions of public education are why I'm running, because I support our current system and know where to focus our energy and power to achieve real change for our teachers. We as teachers have been lied to for over 40 years about getting competitive pay and the respect we deserve. This year we organized and we met with our leaders, and the bill proposed to reform education had very little teeth and did not achieve most of the goals that this organization wants. If we can elect new leaders to take a public education mindset instead of trying to find ways to make their friends more profit, we are going to change our state and build economically, because our schools will be a draw for businesses to locate into our districts. My opinion is that we are at a critical juncture for the first time in 12 years, our citizens have a choice on the ballot. And for our district, that choice is to support public education.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but you will have an opportunity, each of you at the end, if there's anything you want to go back and revisit in case of points made that you'd like to respond to, or even elaborate on if you think of something a little further. So I'm going to stay with you, Mr. Campbell, for my second question, which is, we've talked about a number of things just now. This is a question of priorities. When we look ahead to legislative session beginning in January, what do you think should be our top priority in regards to public education?
Our top priority?
Yes.
Is obviously the teacher retention and recruitment. Now, I don't think that we should throw money at the problem, which is what we've done for years, which is say, hey, we're going to give you a pay raise, but we're also going to make you jump through all these more hoops. Teacher retention and recruitment from a teacher. Now, talking to teachers, that's the one thing that we don't need to have money thrown at us. We need the respect of those other reforms that Senator Davis pointed out in his statement. Those other reforms are where the actual respect comes from, because the money is not really the issue. We need creative ideas that help teachers reduce debt and increase wealth. I've actually pitched some of these ideas to some of the my hopeful colleagues in the state Senate, and they're kind of excited because these are ideas that haven't been talked about because we haven't had a teacher in there. And that perspective of monetary advantage is only one thing to us, because again, we all didn't get into the profession just to get a pay raise. Eventually, after 40 some years, we got into it because we love our kids and we want to do better by them. And if our lives are so strained that we can't do that financially, that's one thing. Now, again, that creativity comes into when we talk about some of the failures of the federal government. One of those things that the Trump administration did was they got rid of student loan repayment programs for teachers, firefighters, and police officers. Our state could actually come in and help some of these ideas that our federal government has failed on, and be a cost-effective way to, when we get teachers here, to keep them here. Because again, we all know that it takes that 5 years, and once that teacher's in for 5, then statistically they're going to stay in the profession. So we should help get them to that 5th year, not make it harder for them by freezing their pay, which is the first thing that happens in economic recession. The last economic recession was during Governor Mark Sanford's time, and one of the first things he did was freeze my pay, because that's when I moved down here. And so for the first 2 years I was a teacher, actually, I think for the first 3 or 4 years I was a teacher, because I think maybe Nikki Haley extended that, well, my pay was frozen. And I was teaching in a small rural county that didn't have the economic advantages of a tax revenues that some of the areas that the PD and coastal area, or the Myrtle Beach and the coastal areas, they get, because they have that tourism influx. So yes, the main priority that I think is the easiest thing to get done when we talk about our legislative priorities is teacher retainment and recruitment, but we have to make it more attractive. The last thing I'd say is that I have a mortgage match program that is actually supported by some in the real estate community that'll get teachers to buy a house. I'm 38 years old, and at 36, I was able to buy my first home as a school teacher. That's not ideal. And with the student loan debt that I still am paying off, these are areas that teachers need help. Student loans and mortgages to buy a house, to reduce debt, and to increase wealth. And I hope that teachers get excited about these ideas, because again, they are cost effective in that they won't cost us that much, because they're one-offs. You get to that threshold, you get a certain matching amount of money. So I would like to say that those are kind of the creative ideas that some other states are looking into right now, and I think that we need to kind of take a step forward and do the same.
Okay, thank you. Senator Davis, same question. What would you prioritize?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start though by correcting a number of misstatements. First of all, the powerful senator I'm talking about is not Greg Embry, it's Luke Rankin, who's chair of Judiciary. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second of all, I do support charter schools, and Mr. Campbell seems to be laboring under the assumption that charter schools aren't public schools. They are, in fact, and I support public charter schools. I support multiple authorizers. I support giving parents the opportunity to organize and to get together and petition their school boards to be chartered. This is the first time I've heard anybody try to make the argument that charter schools weren't public schools. So I wanted to clear that up. Lastly, or not lastly, but third, I did not offer up any amendment to S419 to funnel money away from public schools. There is a bill that I support. That's an exceptional needs scholarship program, which allows $14 million a year to be given to families with kids with special needs. And actually, that particular program is one that I've worked on with Brad Hutto and Vincent Shaheen, because what they realize is these families are getting a better education for their special needs kids than they are in traditional public schools. And traditional public schools and charter schools are realizing they can focus on other students better if they don't have those special needs kids that they have to segregate. So I think it's a potential win-win. Now, in regard to the money that Governor McMaster allocated toward independent schools, private schools, the $32 million, some context here is needed. Yes, $32 million of the CARES Act money was allocated by McMaster for that purpose, but that's out of a $2 billion allotment given to South Carolina by Congress. Okay, and $500 million of that $2 billion has already been put toward traditional K through 12, and likely another $200 or $300 million will be put forward toward traditional K through 12. So let's put that in perspective. When you're talking about the $32 million, which, by the way, a circuit court judge today issued a temporary restraining order against the allotment of that money because it may potentially be violative of the Blaine Amendment. Although we recently had a Supreme Court decision that struck down Montana's Blaine Amendment, so I'm not sure how that's going to play into that situation there. But I think it's important to realize that we're talking about, with the CARES Act money, $2 billion, $800 million of which everything that Molly Spearman has asked for is going to go through K through 12. Now, in regard to when we go back in September, we need to reconcile probably the two versions of S419. I want to make sure that the provisions that I've talked about, and some of the things that I've talked about are in S419. We do away with the EOC. We have to go ahead, though, and have 30 minutes of planning time per day, not just be something subject to a study committee, but something that is guaranteed to a teacher. That has to happen. In regard to class size, that's something that we can take up in the Appropriations Act in September, because the economic projections have been delayed because of the slowdown in revenue collections. We're putting the budget together in September now instead of in April and May. So we have an opportunity. I have an opportunity to not only talk about these things that I believe in, the monetary ones, but to also introduce amendments and also to strike provisos that attain those goals. We raised teacher salaries last year by 4% across the board. We raised teacher salaries for first-time starting teachers. We're committed to raising teacher salaries by 5% this year before we had the budget hit, and I still want to have that 5% increase. So I remain committed, and not only are these words, but these are things we're going to be able to demonstrate when we go back in September.
Mr. Campbell. So, oh no, we're gonna stay with you. I'm sorry, Senator Davis.
Yeah.
So next question is, excuse me, what do you think it means to adequately fund our schools in South Carolina? Where do you think we stand in relation to that? And what, if anything, do you think we should do?
Yeah, where we stand right now in terms of the actual expenditures, per pupil expenditures, we take the total amount of money that's spent on K through 12 in South Carolina as a numerator and divide it by the number of kids as a denominator. We come out right around the middle of the pack, 26th, 27th in the nation. There are 24 or 23 states that spend more than us. The rest spend less than us. But what you find out when you get under the hood is not enough of that money is actually making its way into the classroom. It's not making its way into instructional materials, into teacher salaries, into curriculum enhancements. And the reason for that is this. We have multiple funding streams in South Carolina: the Education Finance Act, the Education Improvement Act, the Education Accountability Act, on and on and on. And each one of those funding streams has a cluster of bureaucrats around it, making sure that all the requirements are followed. What we need to do is take that per pupil funding, which are probably at adequate levels, take away all that bureaucracy by streamlining it, collapsing the funding into one stream, have the various weighting factors that you need to account for poverty and demographics and the things that are in the EFA, and then get rid of all those bureaucrats that are soaking up so much of that money. That's important to do, and that's something that we can do.
Mr. Campbell, same question. Where do you think we sit right now on funding for our schools, and what, if anything, do you think we need to do about it?
All right, so the 12 years I was teaching, taught in Title I schools to start out, and then I moved to Beaufort County. When I moved to Beaufort County, I saw it was night and day. The funding is a problem here, and we might not see it in Beaufort County as much because we've got some awesome schools in Beaufort County, some of the best in the state. And I think that we're able to do things with a referendum that help some of the deficiencies of Act 388. Now, obviously, the easiest aspect to funding is to get that teacher pay raise through, because there is support on both sides of the aisle for that. But the most important funding aspect that needs changed is the repeal of Act 388 and the replacement with a better and more equitable system for education. Every time this is brought up, detractors will say it doubles property taxes. And in talking with scholars from around the state and around the country that have looked at Act 388, this will not double property taxes, but that's a commonly used scare tactic by the real estate lobby. The real estate lobby spends tens of thousands of dollars on our local legislators because the real estate market is so important to the low country. We all know now that Act 388 was created to take to make sure that wealthy homeowner would not have to ever pay their fair share of the tax burden. Now, I've been studying tax policy more recently than I would have ever imagined, and I believe we can rework this funding formula in a bipartisan manner that fully funds education. We need to put these archaic ideas of giving students a minimally adequate education and the ones that came up with that into retirement. My opponent was the policy advisor and the chief of staff for Governor Sanford when the latest version of Act 388 was passed in 2006. This has had a horrible effect on our schools, in especially communities of color. It also puts a tax burden back on the citizens in the forms of referendum to improve our schools, which luckily our county just did recently get a referendum passed of, I think, $354 million. And that was because I was teaching in a school that was 4 years old and was overcrowded. We had students in the lunch room, in the lunch cafeteria, that would have to go in the hallway to sit in a 4-year-old building. If we flip this state Senate seat, we flip the power structure on its head and give us the chance to do things that corporate funded career politicians cannot do because they are beholden to party and they're beholden to donors. If elected, I will be beholden to only one group, the students of the state of South Carolina, because they deserve the best product we can give them.
So my last question is going to speak to assessment. And I'd like to preface this by saying teachers are not adverse to assessment. It guides every single thing that we do in the classroom. It's of extreme importance. Concerns that we hear from many teachers, though, is that when assessment gets boiled down to a single data point in May, it creates a culture within education where everything that happens throughout the whole year is now happening for that one test in May. And it creates classroom cultures that are negative, and it really reduces the amount of content that can be caught within a classroom. So what do you think we should do? How should we be assessing our students, our teachers, our schools, our districts, and our state in terms of education? What might be a solution to this?
For me, right? I'm first.
Start with you, yeah.
Okay, so we can look at this in two areas, obviously students and teachers. For teachers, I mean, yes, we've been given a small raise, but how many hoops do we have to jump through a year? We've got SLOs, we've got Read to Succeed, we've got adept and inclusion and all these hurdles, especially in the first 5 years of teaching when you're trying to learn how to be a teacher, that again, I know that it's simple to say we'll eliminate them and we'll get rid of them, but you have to work. We have to have some type of accountability measure for our teachers, but it doesn't need to be a hoop that needs to be jumped through every year. It needs to be something that the teachers can actually use. And for the SLO, that was what they thought it was going to be. But most districts just use this as a checkbox, and that's kind of sad. Our district doesn't, and I'm very proud of that. And I've been able to use some of my information and data for my SLO to help incorporate into the curriculum writing I do. But we need to make sure that these hoops are eliminated for teachers. And then when it comes to students, yes, we are teaching to a test. If you are teaching an EOC course, because that is what your school is judged on when it comes to state report card time, And that's what your position is judged on, because a lot of these school districts will make your life uncomfortable if you cannot perform in these EOC courses to where you want to leave the profession. And I've seen this happen way too many times in South Carolina, where teachers have left our state and went to other states, started teaching there, and are still teaching because these hoops are so big. Now, when it comes to our students, obviously getting rid of the EOC, I've seen firsthand. I've taught an EOC course, how hard it is to get through all the content, especially in U.S. history. And these students need to be more prepared because we're not able to teach them certain things they should know. They should know people like John Lewis, and they should know what he's already done and his importance. And when I go back, I can't wait to teach some of the lessons that have been taught there, but that's because I teach an elective course. It's called Youth in Government that I helped design. And we allow the students to be creative and use some of those ideas that came from, charter, private, public schools, and to incorporate those into the classroom. Now, again, we're going to have some kind of accountability, but I think that we need to look at that and really take a deep dive into that. I don't think that's as simple as sticking it in a bill and getting rid of it. I think we need to debate and actually have a robust discussion on that. That's why I'm not for omnibusing and putting every issue into a bill, because you've seen in Oklahoma and in West Virginia, we're trying to omnibus education bills, backfires, especially when you get the type of sentiment that these teachers have. I mean, we're looking at a situation right now where you're going to have a even worse situation with education if we don't get some of these things solved in the next session.
Senator Davis, same question, assessment.
Sure. I mean, just the list of things that Mr. Campbell just recited, that's exactly the kind of things I'm hearing from teachers in my district. And in fact, it's what's prompted some teachers, many teachers, to go into the public charter schools that we have here in Beaufort, the ones that Mr. Campbell doesn't like, because those teachers want the flexibility to do what they think is best for the student. They want to have that latitude. They want to be creative. They want to draw upon what they've been trained to do in school. They don't want to be dictated to by bureaucrats saying you've got to teach this particular test. Now I'm going to go back and say what I said earlier. There are certain baseline tests that I know we have to have because ESSA says you have to have those. You're not going to get your federal money. That's fine. But except to the extent that you have to have those tests in order to get federal funds, according to ESSA, we ought not have any other additional tests. Moreover, we ought to affirmatively direct the State Department of Education to apply for flexibility waivers to the federal government that the ESSA actually encourages, so that every teacher in a traditional K-12 classroom has the same sort of flexibility, the same sort of creativity, the same sort of ability to use their professional expertise that charter school teachers now enjoy. One thing that I was struck by in talking to teachers, charter school teachers seem to be a lot happier because they don't have these tests imposed upon them, because they're not abused, because they don't have their 30-day planning time interrupted, because they're not asked to work extra hours, because they're not imposed all these extra burdens. I want traditional K-12 teachers to have that same latitude, that same creativity, that same ability to exercise their professional expertise that's enjoyed by public charter school teachers. And that's sort of my benchmark.
Great. So I'd like to finish, and we'll start with you, Senator Davis, and then finish up with Mr. Campbell. Is there any last words that you would like to share with potential voters? Anything you'd like to elaborate on from tonight, or touch on some other issues maybe we didn't get a chance to address?
Right. I've outlined today, and thank you for SC for Ed for offering me this opportunity to articulate this. You've given me an opportunity tonight to recite the four reforms that involve money and the 5 that don't involve money. You'll have an opportunity to see me in September to see whether or not I can put my actions where my mouth is. Am I going to support an across-the-board teacher pay increase? Am I going to support the reinstitution of national board certifications? Am I going to support the extension of stipends to those who want a career in education? Am I going to support repealing the proviso that takes away the classroom requirements that are already in statute? Am I going to support the Teacher Bill of Rights? Am I going to support the decreased testing? Am I going to put forward a proviso that requires the State Department to seek these waivers from the ESSA, and to go ahead and reduce to only the levels of the ones that the federal law requires us to have? am I going to commit myself to making sure that the 10 days of unencumbered time, you have 190 days in the contract, 180 days has to be instructional. Am I going to commit myself to making those 10 days truly unencumbered time and not being dictated to by administrators, teachers that is, about what constitutes professional development? You'll have an opportunity to see whether or not I truly believe that. You're going to see whether or not we restructure ESC or abolish it altogether. And lastly, you're going to see an attempt to move up that start date, to make it earlier so that you can finish the first semester before that winter break for those three reasons we've already talked about. End of course tests, teacher preparing for the next semester, and not having these districts do things on an ad hoc basis, shortening one semester, lengthening another. This is not just talk. This is something that I believe in. It's something that I worked on earlier this year. You'll get to see whether or not I'm serious about it in September.
Mr. Campbell, any final word?
Yeah, I'm going to first off state that I don't think that public charter schools are a problem or a nuisance. But I like how he was able to politically make it sound like that. And one of the things I want to be very clear about is I do not have any issues with what Senator Davis supports. I have an issue with him getting support from the people in Columbia. And these reforms could have been done a long time ago. And if you've been in there for 20 years, then you probably should have handled some of this stuff before an election year. And so we see that most of this stuff will probably get passed because it is an election year and they do all have to run for re-election in November. But I'd first like to thank you I'd like to thank the teachers of South Carolina and the SC for Ed for being our organizational arm, because you guys are trying to change education for the better. I would like to encourage teachers from all around the state to become involved in this election, but at our local and state levels, because most of us have already an idea of who we're going to vote for president. We need to understand and know the issues behind who supports what. Ask your candidates their positions on our issues. More than likely, they will give you an answer that's been approved by their party or a consulting firm, because that's what the game is about. But our students' lives and their education is not a political game. If you're tired of the image in South Carolina being so negative towards our public schools and now hyper-partisan, to start an attack on our public education system weeks before we go back, we need leaders like the late Representative John Lewis, who was not afraid to speak up when times were tough. And we need more leaders that will stand up, build a consensus, and get these things passed in public education. I feel like I can be that person for Beaufort and Jasper counties. I feel like I can be that person for South Carolina. I wouldn't be running if I didn't think I could. So if you're interested, if this is actually something that interests you, I'd love for you to get involved in my campaign website, www.campbell4sc.com. Come there, help us. You know, we always like to talk to teachers and we like to talk about the issues. So please feel free to reach out to me and reach out to the campaign. And I hope to have your support in November.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank you both for spending time with us this evening and speaking out directly to voters about issues. And our hope is that, yes, all teachers get out to vote, but please don't just vote by party, vote by issues and go in informed, know what you're voting for. Thank you and good luck to both of you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.